This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across Africa and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets here for you. So, quite a few results are starting to filter through into the markets now. Consumer spending in some specific markets may be subdued, but frankly, listed South African retailer Pick n Pay clearly missed that memo. It's reported first half headline earnings per share of at least 85 rand cents, up 9% year on year, even after accounting for Zimbabwe's sky-high inflation. South Africa, of course, being a key driver of these numbers. Despite price cuts in that market, sales were up 6.5%. Here's what's coming up tonight. Russia gears up for the Russia-Africa summit taking place in Sochi in the next 24 hours. Boris Johnson threatens an early election as lawmakers vote again on the UK's withdrawal from the EU. And an incentive-based recycling scheme is improving waste management in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Quite a bit to get through tonight. But let's start with something happening outside the continent. African leaders are in Sochi, at least 40 of them, to take part in the Russia-Africa Forum. The Kremlin is expecting no less than 47 heads of state to attend the two-day event, which starts on Wednesday, the 23rd of October. It's part of Russia's ambitious push now for influence and business across the continent. Now, Russia's interests on the continent are in trade and security so far. CGTN's Ramah Nyang now examines the country's growing influence across Africa.
In the past decade, Russia recorded a 350% increase in trade with Africa. By 2018, trade with sub-Saharan Africa had peaked at $20 billion. Much of Russia's key investments on the continent are in oil, gas, and the nuclear sectors. In 2015, Russia signed a $25 billion agreement with Egypt to build its first nuclear power plant by 2026. Several Russian energy companies, mostly state-owned like Gazprom, have energy interests in Algeria, Angola, Nigeria, and Uganda. Another area the superpower has interests in is Africa's mineral sector. Russia has already signed a $4 billion deal with Zimbabwe to develop the world's largest deposits of platinum. The country also has mining interests in Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Namibia, and the Central African Republic. Security is another area of cooperation Russia will be seeking. Already, it is the largest arms supplier in Africa and has pursued military ties with Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. In the Central African Republic, Moscow has a team of military advisors training the country's army. At least 40 African leaders and about 3,000 business representatives are expected to attend the two-day summit in Sochi. Robert Nagela, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
All right then, so Russia wants to engage a lot more, essentially, in economies on the continent. Of course, it brings back memories of the Cold War and everything that happened before 1991. But what exactly should we expect this time round? Let's find out from South Africa's perspective. Angelo Coppola joins us now live from Johannesburg. So, Angelo, from South Africa's perspective, what's the end game here from the summit? What's the current status of bilateral ties, trade and investment between Russia and South Africa?
Well, look, we've been hearing about three pillars that are going to be centered, the talks are going to be centered around, that they're planning to follow, in fact. That's around forging economic ties, creating joint projects and collaborating in the humanitarian and social sectors. So those are really broad categories and they're encompassing a huge number of sectors in South Africa. So at the moment, there are around 38 bilateral agreements and or those memoranda of understanding between the two countries. And yet, the South African exports into Russia accounted for around $150 million. That was in 2011. it jumped to around $265 million in 2015. And so that reflects a 16% compounded interest over those 5 years. So if you compound that further on for the last 4 years, it's still not a big number. It's small, in fact, by comparison to South Africa's trade with China or the EU or even the US, for example. But that could all change after this 2-day meeting. Of course, the bottom line for South Africa is it's looking for trading partners, it's looking for markets and to sell its locally made products, and of course the resources that it has. And Russia is probably looking to get in and get some action now that the Africa Free Trade area is starting to move towards reality. So we're looking at a bit of a win-win for both sides in this case. Raman?
Indeed, let's pedal back slightly, Angelo. There were plans not too long ago to build nearly 10 gigawatts of new nuclear power generation capacity in South Africa. Those plans were shelved as Jacob Zuma left office, but is South Africa still keen on expanding nuclear generation capacity? And if so, would it do so with Russian investment and tech?
Well, look, nuclear is definitely back in the power mix, and that's as of last week. But it's not going to be seen anywhere before 2030. Gwede Mantashe, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, told us on Friday that they would be starting to look at small modular nuclear reactors. But because of that long lead time to get that nuclear plant up and running, that 2030 deadline isn't as far away as it seems. As to whether Russia will be a preferred supplier, well, Mantashe says that that's not the case. They'll look at all the technologies from all the countries that have nuclear power that they can sell to South Africa in terms of the plant. You'll of course remember that South Africa had a bit of a beauty parade of sorts a couple of years ago when the nuclear build companies pitched their options or their offerings to the Department of Energy in South Africa, but nothing apparently came of that. We do know that Russia has some 15 nuclear projects on its books that haven't yet been finalized or signed off, and that's just in Africa alone. So it's likely that come 23rd, 24th and 25th, in fact, Rosatom are going to probably pitch something to the South African delegation or to some of the business people that are attending from South Africa. But any selection process will be scrutinized by all stakeholders to make sure that it's clean, in fact sparkling clean, before it gets anywhere near a build stage. Raman?
Indeed. One last question for you, Angelo. There's a pair of Russian nuclear-capable bombers, Tupolev 160s, White Swans, as they're nicknamed in some quarters, landing tomorrow in Joburg. But South Africa's never had any Russian hardware in its Air Force fleet. Might the government be interested in switching away from its current fleet of fighters made in Sweden by Saab?
Well, those two planes were actually meant to land in South Africa a couple of years back for the Africa Aerospace and Defence exhibition that was happening at Waterkloof Air Force Base. So they're a couple of years late. In terms of whether South Africa would think about getting involved with purchasing nuclear-powered or nuclear-ready planes, I think the SANDF is not in the market for anything that is anything like that, because remember back in 1989, in fact, the government officially ended its nuclear program and of course joined the non-proliferation treaty as a non-nuclear weapon state. So by 1991 that was done. By 94 the IAEA in fact confirmed that all South Africa's nuclear weapons had in fact been dismantled. So while those are great and awesome planes and they look awesome and they make a huge amount of noise, the country would probably not be interested unless of course they've extracted themselves from that non-proliferation treaty and haven't told anyone yet. Ramah?
Indeed, it would be interesting to see from Mikoyan Gurevich, and of course Sukhoi would also be pitching for fighter jets in South Africa. Angela Kopler in Joburg, thank you. Now, the third ABSA Africa Financial Markets Index has been released in Johannesburg on Tuesday. The index essentially records the openness and the depth of foreign investment of countries right across the continent. It's essentially the premier indicator of the attractiveness of capital markets across Africa. South Africa took the top spot when it came to the financial market development, market depth and liquidity of the market as well. Other countries that also made it onto the list: Mauritius, second in terms of a sizable pool of investable assets. Kenya came third with their sovereign bond listings enhancing its asset pool. Namibia was fourth with a wide range of financial products available but relatively low market turnover. Botswana was fifth with reduced local investor capacity there. Nigeria, Tanzania and Egypt among the other African nations that essentially made it to that list as well. Angelo Coppola, of course, joins us again. He's got more details on this.
The index tracks 60 indicators, making it one of the most comprehensive of its kind in the world. But the story of the index isn't about South Africa only. Seychelles has moved up the ranking steadily.
It's actually the country that has improved the most since we launched the index in 2017. This has been mainly due to the growth in the local asset pools and also a lot of innovation that we've seen from the Seychelles. So in 2018, the Seychelles launched the world's first blue bond, a bond whose proceeds are intended to go into marine protection and conservation and fisheries projects.
There are many African countries that have kept a tight rein on foreign exchange, which has hampered development and economic growth. The index provides evidence that there's more upside to liberalizing foreign exchange.
We've seen that in countries like Nigeria, Egypt, Angola, where the foreign regime was liberalized or relaxed into a more flexible regime, and immediately saw a lot of investment from foreign investors into the market.
Egypt, the index researchers say, is a good case study of what can be achieved. It's been through an IMF program recently, but it's getting its house in order.
Debt profile improving, we're seeing growth prospects improving, also a lot more transparency in terms of how it's doing its budget. So pillar 5 of the index, which measures the macroeconomic opportunity, Egypt is doing quite well there.
Another country that has had its challenges is Mozambique. It's signed several massive LNG project agreements, but still has the hidden debt scandal hanging over its head.
It's important for financial market infrastructure to be built, to raise the necessary funding to support these new and emerging sectors of economies across the continent. In particular case is Mozambique, where these opportunities really abound.
A lot of countries are launching new platforms, new products, they're merging existing platforms, they're launching new stock exchanges. For example, Ethiopia didn't have one until now. It plans now to have one in 2020.
While the index is a reflection of what's happening on the African continent, it's most important that African countries begin investing in each other so that the countries and the continent can grow. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to corporate headlines now. Saudi Aramco has initiated plans to become the largest global refiner in efforts to secure future demand for crude products and boost growth of the bottom line. The firm is expected to invest in projects that are underway in markets due to high demand from two key consumers, India and China. South Africa's vertically integrated utility Eskom is taking legal action to recover $14 million linked to contracts which it alleges now were improperly awarded to Deloitte Consulting back in 2016. The company's been drowning in debt. It's estimated to have over $30 billion on its books, and it's heavily reliant on government bailouts in order to just keep the lights running. Elsewhere, the South African supermarket retailer Pick n Pay has posted a 9.5% rise in first half earnings. The rise, of course, is being attributed to strong growth in its core domestic operations across some 1,600 outlets, outweighing challenges in other markets like Zambia and Zimbabwe. Headline earnings per share, 85.03 Rand cents from a restated 77.67 cents back in 2018. And finally, the CEOs of commercial banks have distanced themselves from the moves by MTN Nigeria to impose charges on USSD transactions, or unstructured supplementary service data, if you use its full term. The group has denied asking the telco to make deductions from banks' depositors. MTN subscribers who are depositors at GT Bank got text messages saying that every usage of USSD codes for banking services would be charged 4 Naira for every 20 seconds they were on. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Egypt's tourism sector gets a boost as the UK lifts a ban on direct flights to Sharm el-Sheikh. And we'll explore why a safety audit has grounded some planes at South African Airways and Comair when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global Business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Now, the United Kingdom has lifted a ban on direct flights to Sharm el-Sheikh, the resort city on the Red Sea, after nearly 4 years. Flights over there were stopped after 224 people died in the bombing of a Russian airliner linked to the Islamic State group. Egyptian officials have since then admitted that the airport did fall short of international security standards. The UK's Department for Transportation says there had been improvements in security procedures. But it then says, and I quote, there remains a heightened risk of terror against aviation in Egypt, end of quote. Sharm el-Sheikh, though, has been a very popular destination for UK holidaymakers, if the number's anything to go by. According to the Foreign Office, 900,000 UK visitors travelled to the city in 2015. That number dropped the following year to just over 230,000 in the wake of that flight ban. Let's see what's happened since then. Yasser Kim joins us now live from Cairo with more data on this particular story. So Yasser, let's look at the numbers here. How did tourism traffic from the UK coming into Egypt evolve after this flight ban was imposed?
Yes, the UK has been the third highest exporter of tourists to Egypt before the incident, or the tragic incident, at around an average of 1.5 million a year tourists. Now, after the 2015, it had dropped to 300,000 or 400,000 average also since then per year. So that's a huge drop, although the numbers could look good, 400,000. However, it's less than half of the original number of tourists who come from the UK before 2015. But obviously, Sharm el-Sheikh is one of the most attractive locations or destinations for UK travelers, and that's why there has been a big difference there. However, obviously the 400,000 who have gone to Egypt in the last year or so have been to another Red Sea resort called Hurghada. This is the main attractive point for the UK travelers, as well as Dahab, also all on the Red Sea, where you have the beaches and the sun and the relaxation. These are resorts that you can have high-end hotels and luxury hotels as well. And at the same time, you have all kinds of benefits. So they look for that. And obviously, after the flotation of the Egyptian pound, floating the Egyptian pound in 2016, the prices of tourism or trips to Egypt more than dropped by half. So that also attracted tourists, not just from the UK, but from other countries. And therefore, it kept the number at that rate.
Right. So in terms of security at airports, we keep hearing from Egyptian officials that things have improved. But specifically, what was changed and what were the security holes, so to speak, that were plugged?
There was a major overhaul of the security apparatus and equipment in the airport. Mainly, a lot of it was brought from Russia in agreement with the Russian forces. There has been new equipment for searching visitors and passengers, equipment on searching flights, airplanes, and more important was also a check on the workers in the airport, because there was news back then that one of the issues that led to the catastrophe was that it came from one of the workers in the luggage area. So that was also being overhauled. Every employee in the airport is now being checked as he goes in or out. All the equipment has been put not just inside the airport, but on diameters around the airport. As you reach the airport, there's a lot of checkpoints on the way. So there has been a lot of checkpoints, not just in Cairo airport, but Sharm el-Sheikh, Hurghada, and other airports. And there were, until now, monthly visits by security teams from European countries and the United States to ensure that this security system is being undertaken on a sustainable basis, not just for one time or just for a period of time, but on a permanent basis as well.
Indeed. One last question for you, Yasser. The numbers for last year look fairly interesting. 9 million tourists coming into the country. Not quite the record we saw in 2010 at 15 million, but it's essentially been improving. Revenues at $7.6 billion. What does the first half of 2019 look like as far as tourism numbers and tourism revenue are concerned?
Well, if we look at the first 9 months of the fiscal year, we're talking about the same number of visitors for the whole of 2018. You're talking about 9 million visitors so far. So we're expecting by the end of 2019, if things go as planned, without any unforeseen or sad events or urgent events, we could reach 11 to 12 million tourists by the end of 2019, especially that we're going into the highest season of the year, which is the last quarter of the year, which is the New Year and Christmas. And that's where we get most of the European visitors who come here to spend Christmas and New Year on a weather that is more bearable than the very cold weathers in Europe. And therefore, we expect even the income to reach $9 billion if things go as well, and that's around 20% or more than the year before.
Indeed, we'll wait and see how the numbers do play out. Yasser Kim, live in Cairo. Thank you very much. Now then, let's turn our attention to South Africa, where the aviation industry is bracing for a bit of chaos after carriers announced enormous delays after the grounding of some of their aircraft. The move comes after a safety audit conducted by the country's civil aviation regulator. It detected deficiencies in the maintenance procedures by South African Airways Technical. It's essentially an outfit that carries out maintenance on behalf of most airlines in the country. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with the latest.
South African skies remain relatively quiet today after the Civil Aviation Authority issued a prohibition order for airlines operating in the country. The problem stems from non-compliance in maintenance procedures picked up by aviation authorities, which points to potential concerns about air safety. And the Department of Transport has backed the aircraft groundings.
All the major airlines have actually been affected. And like we actually said, this has been an act on the side of precaution, so that it shouldn't be that an audit has not been conducted and recommendations were made for what needs to be done, and nobody responded to that.
The deficiencies found in samples of aircraft maintained by South African Airways Technical meant that not only SAA were affected, but so too were Mango and British Airways operated by Comair. The move may have left thousands stranded, but the safety of the aircraft and passengers were of prime concern, and the national carriers moved urgently to be in compliance.
SAA in particular have developed an action plan which have already been accepted by SACA in terms of addressing some of the challenges that have actually been raised with them.
For now, South African Airways as well as the other airlines have moved to ship their other aircraft to take up the slack left by the grounding of their planes. And passengers are slowly beginning to arrive at their destinations around the country. The Department of Transport believes the situation should be resolved by the end of the week and that most airlines should be operating as normal. There's no clarity on what the financial damage will be like to the industry or what public sentiment will be like towards air safety going forward. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
On to Zimbabwe now. Economists are warning that printing new banknotes in the Southern African economy could further fuel inflation in Zimbabwe. The economy is now essentially plagued by the second highest rate of inflation in the world after Venezuela. CGTN's Farai Muktuya explains.
Persistent cash shortages have turned currency into a commodity that people are buying at a premium on the black market. To address the misnomer, more banknotes are being printed, a move that shouldn't have adverse impact if everything goes as planned.
A lot of people still have that the former governor of the Reserve Bank, Gono era, where he would print notes to pay for goods and services, which is different from what the current government is trying to do, where we are printing notes in exchange for electronic money. So it's like banks who exchange electronic money that they have in their accounts and get notes, cash and notes and coins into the banking system, which is different in terms of inflation. It doesn't cause inflation.
But people here who've been burnt before are still apprehensive.
We have got a worry that as a market, the government may not be able to adhere to the printing limits that they set. Because if you look at it, they're supposed to print probably up to 10% or 15% of the broad money supply, which is up to about 2 billion. But the danger is that they will print more than the 2 billion.
Another concern is keeping the new currency in the formal system.
Because of Zimbabwe's highly informalized economy, whatever notes and coins are in circulation may end up here, on the streets, exchanging hands outside of the banks.
That would require enforcement of banking regulations.
We have got the laws which we should be able to use to make sure that people actually bank their daily takings, but they haven't been used in the past years.
The recent introduction of laws that tighten currency flows have elicited a public outcry, a response that reflects a lack of confidence, the other currency that's indispensable if economic stabilization efforts are to succeed. Farai Muktuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
In the meantime, China is also backing calls for Western governments to lift sanctions against Zimbabwe. The move does add weight to calls first made by member states of the Southern African Development Community. The sanctions that were placed on Zimbabwe roughly 2 decades ago have contributed to the country's economic decline. Zimbabwe's business community says these sanctions have denied them a chance to tap into global trade opportunities. They also enable, they say, to get access to credit lines, especially outside the country, and they've lost export markets as enjoyed by other nations. At least 200,000 people are expected to take part in a planned anti-sanctions march in Zimbabwe later on Friday.
Opposed the illegal sanctions imposed by the US and the Western countries is unfair and illegal, and for Zimbabwe. It's not just a simple sanction. It causes serious consequences for the development of Zimbabwe, particularly make tremendous difficulties for Zimbabwe to making normal business and trade with the countries of the world.
The first thing that happens is that sanctions, they cast a shadow of doubt on your credibility as a nation, as a country. That alone is a serious problem for the economy because would-be investors need to be a little bit more cautious and careful, and to a large extent your risk profile just goes up, almost like that. In a practical sense, the sanctions will cause a stagnation to the economy.
It's about 18:30 GMT. You're watching Global Business. We'll be back shortly with more content.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. See, business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's focus on a developing story at this point in time. Brexit and essentially the debate around the withdrawal bill in the House of Commons. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will abandon his attempt to ratify the exit from the EU if Parliament delays his legislation. Now, he also added he will be pushing for an early election as the deadline approaches. The departure, of course, is hanging in the balance. As a divided Parliament is debating exactly how this bill will go through the House. Lawmakers are expected to vote on the withdrawal agreement bill in a couple of stages and the government's approval for that legislation. Let's listen into what's happening in the House of Commons.
Until we reach a decision, I must say, we will pause this legislation. And let me be clear. Let me be clear. Our policy remains that we should not delay, that we should leave the EU on October the 31st, and that is what I will say to the EU, and I will report back to the House. And one way or another, we will leave the EU with this deal to which this House has just given its assent. And I thank members across the House for that hard-won agreement.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say I find the response of the Prime Minister quite extraordinary, because the facts of the matter are...
Order. The right honourable gentleman is entitled to raise a point of order, and he is entitled to be heard. Let's hear the right honourable member, and then we will expedite progress. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The facts of the matter are this is yet another humiliating defeat for the Prime Minister this evening, who has sought to railroad through this House legislation that requires proper scrutiny. And rightly, this House has spoken with a very clear voice to tell the Prime Minister he is not on. And furthermore, it is absolutely crystal clear what should now happen, because there is legislation passed by this House. It is the law of the land, on the basis of not agreeing a deal, that the Prime Minister is instructed, Prime Minister, to seek an extension. Go to Brussels and do as you have been instructed, and do not put yourself offside against this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it is crystal clear that this is a government that has no confidence, but a government that has sought to ignore the wishes of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people. It is obvious to us that if we want to guarantee our rights as EU citizens...
All right, then let me just bring you up to speed as well with a quick summary of what has happened in the House of Commons, essentially in the last half hour or so in which you've been on air. The Prime Minister lost a vote on essentially having the withdrawal agreement bill debated within the next 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He lost that 322 votes to 308. However, he did have a bit of a win earlier on in the session. Legislators essentially did approve the withdrawal agreement can proceed for debate. That particular vote, the government won 329 to 299. But in the next stage of the debate, legislators may have an opportunity now to essentially amend the deal terms. But the speed with which the Prime Minister wanted to get this bill through the House of Commons, essentially 3 days, that's essentially what Ian Blackford was talking about there. He's basically said the Prime Minister lost, and that is a vote that he was referring to, the government losing there 322 to 308. You can expect more updates on developments from the UK in subsequent bulletins. Now, with each edition of the World Internet Conference comes new challenges for succeeding in an ever-expansive digital world. The 6th edition of the event attracted over 1,500 experts from over 80 countries and regions, and it promised quite a few interesting things in 5G, machine learning, AI, and a lot more. CGTN's Yang Qingxi takes us to Wuzhen in China for a wrap-up of the event.
Goals reached, deals signed, breakthroughs announced. Those at the 6th World Internet Conference call it a busy and productive 3 days, complete with 20 sub-forums. Officials said participants have engaged in wide discussions over hot issues like artificial intelligence, 5G networks, as well as open-source processing chips. Earlier, in another room, startup entrepreneurs were fighting for a chance to be the next internet tycoon. This was the grand finale to the Straight to Wuzhen Global Internet Competition. Participants pitched their companies to policymakers, investors, and the global audience. And the winners have secured an opportunity to put their businesses on the fast track for growth. The conference in this picturesque town is also a platform for business leaders to brainstorm how to merge internet and tech with global trends, such as China's Belt and Road initiatives.
We are a platform focused on agricultural products. I hope that internet technologies can be a great enabler of the Belt and Road initiative. Chinese experience in e-commerce can be promoted across the region in many countries that lag behind in digital economy. China has high demands for good foreign farming produce, and we need to rely on e-commerce to import more of it.
What's more, it's been a bridge to connect international companies who want to expand cooperation with partners in China and beyond.
We already started to talk with the China Unicom, and we are trying to also engage with the internet companies. And what we want to do is, since we are also building a Silkway, a digital Silkway with fiber connections from Europe to Asia, and we can be a very good partner to Chinese companies in 5G technologies.
The conference also saw the release of 15 scientific and technological achievements from top tech companies.
China's internet boom is offering more opportunities for content creators, from video bloggers to online writers. All they need to do, however, is find out A, what is their market, and B, what tickles the public's fancy. Here's more on that story.
Elegantly dressed and made up, video blogger Wu Haha is about to start her day's work. Beauty and skincare is her specialty. A 3-minute short video in which he talks about product experiences and makes recommendations can be more popular than advertisements. She has more than 1 million followers on Weibo, one of China's most popular social media platforms. But she claims anyone can do what she does.
其实在之前没有自媒体的时候，大家可能都需要一些科班的训练啊，然后需要挤破头才有机会站上荧幕。但是有自媒体平台之后呢，我觉得甚至很普通的人都有机会，就是把自己美好的生活分享给其他，甚至是全球的人来看到。我是一天都将就不了的哇哈哈，关注了吗？找大家关注。
In marketing parlance, it would be more precise to call Wu a KOL, or a key opinion leader, someone who influences a certain number of customers in a specific area. Last year, there were reported to be more than 10 million KOLs in China, all fighting for our attention. And with more and more people switching from their television sets to their mobile devices, it's turning into a lucrative business.
我多久没看过电视了？天哪！6、7年，上大学之后我就没有看过电视了。电视的节目也可能通过网络的平台来收看。
Meanwhile, millions of Chinese are also churning through all sorts of articles on another popular social media platform, Wechat. The Fair Lab has already made a big impression, but what's it all about?
主要关注年轻人，然后城市和品牌。我们大概是在半年内积累了大约70万左右的粉丝。阅读量最高的一篇文章是一篇关于北京 海淀和朝阳区的对比的。那篇文章大概阅读量在150万以上。
1.5 million views. I've seen and shared that story before. City life, vivid pictures, strong resonations. Feels like I'm part of the story as well. Isn't that why millions of Wechat stories are being read and shared each and every day?
会经常跟他们聊他们生活中的一些烦恼，他们最近买了什么、吃了什么，或者去哪里玩，我们都会去了解。我觉得和用户做朋友是一个我自己保持自己的敏感度的一个很重要的方法。公众号的话，我认为这个形式还可以走很远，因为它给了每个人都能够发声的一个渠道。
For CGTN, Byron Zeng.
Now, you're probably not a stranger to cat cafes, but have you ever heard of a duck cafe? One such themed cafe in the southwestern Chinese city of Chengdu apparently has become quite popular for customers to spend time with the birds while enjoying their meals. CGTN's Francis Guo has that story.
This may look like life on the farm, but it's actually an afternoon at a cafe.
Everyone loves ducks.
Here at this cafe in Chengdu, coffee and food aren't the biggest draw. It's the 2 baby pigs and 4 ducks.
They're really fun and very obedient.
Obedient and pricey. The cafe imported this breed of call ducks from Europe for more than $1,000 US. They're a species specifically raised as pets. Customers can pet them and take selfies.
We think the animals are really cute.
So does Liu Yaochi, the cafe's co-founder. The idea all began from his own love of ducks.
I started off by raising a duckling all the way to its adulthood, so I thought it could be possible to open a duck cafe. It's the same concept I had with the pigs. Chengdu is a city that is quite open to accepting new things, so at the moment there are lots of people, and everyone's enjoying themselves.
Liu's Cafe is one of several pet-themed cafes popping up. Cats have been the popular theme in China and around the world. But there are also unconventional ones, like this owl cafe in Tokyo. Psychologists say the contact can help relieve stress and put people in touch with animals when they don't have pets of their own.
The contact, not replacing human contact, but it's a different kind.
And the cafe's customers hope the animals get something out of it too.
From the pet's point of view, what they're doing every day is very tough. I hope the store owner can shorten their working hours so they will not be too tired.
But for these critters, it's all in a day's work to deliver some joy with a cup of joe. Francis Ko, CGTN.
All right, then I'm going to give you an update on the pound in just a moment, but let's focus on commodities first. So Zambia, of course, is the continent's second largest copper producer. Its fiscal health is, to put it mildly, quite shaky. Fitch warns today that its 2020 budget proposals failed to plug external funding holes. It's forecasting a fiscal deficit of 8.1% this year, 8.5% the next, and debt servicing costs are just going to keep rising. Now, with respect, of course, to the developments in the House of Commons, the pound has been having an absolutely horrible time in the last 15 minutes or so. It's essentially fallen by about 0.5%. It was really close to 130 against the dollar. Now we're looking at 128.93, down 0.52%, and it's still essentially in free fall at this point in time. In relation, of course, to the debate that we're seeing at this point in the House of Commons. Just to update you, of course, the Prime Minister lost a vote to try and fast-track the withdrawal agreement essentially right through the House of Commons. Expect further updates in the course of the hour. Here's what's coming up next. We'll look at an incentive-based recycling scheme that's improving waste management in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. And we'll show you how this young South African is preserving dying local languages when we return.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Nigeria generates an estimated 32 million tons of solid waste every single year. That's one of the highest levels on the continent. Most of the waste is generated by households, in some cases by local industries, artisans and traders. But of this amount, only 20 to 30% is collected and recycled. The remainder finds its way to dump sites, sewers, drainage networks, and it causes some serious environmental problems. But one startup, EcoBarter, is now running an incentive-based recycling scheme that aims to improve waste management and build much healthier communities in the capital, Abuja. CGTN's Deji Badmus has that story on Grassroots.
Bottles that we've collected from water companies.
Blessing Ekwere is at the heart of the operations at EcoBarter, a waste collection startup she and a friend set up just last year. Their motivation is for a cleaner capital city, and it's thanks in part to their effort that Abuja is considered among the cleanest cities in Nigeria. Plastics are estimated to make up 2.5 million tons of the waste materials generated in Nigeria annually, and apart from Lagos, the bulk of the plastic waste are generated in Abuja.
Our scavengers usually go into dumps, households, and get all this around, and then we pile them up here until it's about, say, 2 to 3 tons before we move them to the companies that break them down for recycling.
Every day, scavengers contracted by EcoBarter go around the city, collecting waste which are then brought to this facility for weigh-in and sorting.
We do door-to-door collections and make sure that even your food waste, the food waste still ends up in a controlled dump site. We also do buy-offs from big scavengers. We enter dumps and do buy-offs from them, collect their waste in bulk, and then transport it to the company for them for recycling. So far, since inception, we've been able to divert 100,000 kilograms of waste from landfills.
Through the EcoBarter initiative, the scavengers now have a means of livelihood, and about 100 of them now work for EcoBarter. At the end of every day's supply, the scavengers and Blessing hold a meeting where each scavenger's supply is calculated and entered into the farm's record for payment.
Part of the reasons we do this is to be able to earn a living to take care of ourselves and our families. But some of us are orphans. Nonetheless, they can be of assistance to their siblings or friends. In fact, what I earn from this trade in 2 weeks, even a top-ranking civil servant can't earn in a month.
For Ekwere and her colleague at EcoBarter, the vision is to create an active and sustainable system that ensures environmental safety one community at a time. And despite the daunting challenge, they are forging ahead.
We need more finance to be able to run this at a larger scale. That's what we want. And then another challenge we have is the mindset, because we are not just about having guys go around to pick waste. We want people to see the importance of sorting their waste, and then so already we in Nigeria, we already have a mindset that it's waste. As long as it has been thrown away, it's away. So we want people to see that they capture value for their waste, and then indiscriminate dumping is a problem to them.
As the zero waste movement continues to spread across the globe, stakeholders and waste management companies like this are keen on intensifying campaigns to enlighten the general public on the need for proper disposal of solid waste. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
On to South Africa now. Officially, the country has 11 official languages, but In a modern world with globalization rounding amok all over the place, English is essentially the universal language of communication. Sadly, though, many people all over the world, especially young children, are losing touch with their indigenous languages. But one young South African who's passionate about culture and tradition is now using tech to solve that problem. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu tells us more.
Mukundi Lambani is from Venda, a former South African homeland in the far north of the country, almost bordering Zimbabwe. Lambani grew up amongst tribes, but she also had an opportunity to see the world, which exposed her to the realities of modernization and technology.
The app was inspired by my own experience. I think I really wanted to speak my own language of Tshivenda a lot better, and I found that there aren't a lot of accessible online resources for me to do that. So I'd have to either know people or speak to my family, which isn't always possible. So I thought if I'm having the struggle, maybe other people are, and so Ambani was born.
Ambani is an African language content platform for young learners. Lambani had a desire to use technology to create more learning content and support material in African languages. The app is 3D, making it fun and entertaining for the little ones.
We have sort of different target markets. On one hand, we just have parents who really want their kids to learn their own language, but they don't have the time or the resources to do so. So it's something that's really fun and interactive that kids can do on their own or that they can do with their parents.
I'm closer, and Mali's father is from Zimbabwe, so he speaks Shona. So unfortunately in the house we end up speaking English. The value of knowing your language and being able to identify with the language is enormous. I've lived in places like Italy where the fact that I spoke Xhosa created so much value in that experience, which you wouldn't think it would, but it really, really did. It did level, and I don't want to rob my daughter of that experience. It's not fair.
It is absolutely important to be able to be multilingual, to be able to speak your own language as confidently as you do speak English. Outside of the identity issues, we also find that our learners don't want to learn, but it's because they're not being taught in a way that is an emotionally felt experience. When you learn in your own language, it's not the cerebral experience, it's one that's emotionally experienced. And so I feel like a lot of our learners miss out on that because they're learning in essence in a foreign language.
For now, the app teaches only Zulu and Xhosa, but Lambani is working on introducing all the South African languages onto the platform. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, then a quick run through some currencies for you. South Africa watches one date for your calendar, October 30th. That's next week, Wednesday. That's when the country's medium-term budget statement will be coming out. Reuters did poll economists ahead of this. They're expecting Eskom's woes to compel the state to push the deficit a bit from the 4.3% that was forecast in Feb, closer to 6% of GDP by the end of the year. Quick update as far as the sterling dollar rate is concerned. It's now essentially fallen by about almost 0.6%, really, down 0.56% in the last half hour or so. Essentially, Brexit seems set for a bit of a delay after Mr. Johnson lost the vote, essentially trying to fast-track his agreement through the House of Commons over the next 3 days. Expect further updates on that in the next bulletins to come. That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour or so. There's several ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. Well, today's up next from Washington, D.C.